better than this. And that's why Ms. McCollum and I have worked together, reached across aisles to say we can spend this money elsewhere more effectively. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Strike last word.
And the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Wait a minute. He's still on his amendment. We haven't voted
Oh, excuse
on
Mr.
Chair,
Withdraw.
Gentleman withdraws. Gentleman from North Carolina?
I rise in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Chair, thank you so much, and I certainly appreciate my colleague, Ms. McCollum and Mr. Kingston, and what they're trying to achieve. And I certainly support paring down the budget where it is appropriate and where it actually saves money. My colleague references some numbers that come from the Army. The Army is getting out of this type of sponsorship. The numbers that I want to give you are from the National Guard that intends to stay in this form of advertising for recruiting purposes and also for building goodwill among the American people. This sponsorship program that the National Guard has in one form, one very specific form of sponsorship that they have, as well as a number of others, but this one form of sponsorship for NASCAR, the National Guard saw a nearly 300% return on their investment. Now, that comes from $68 million of media exposure. It comes from 5.5 million pieces of merchandise and apparel that has National Guard on it, which has a value of roughly $70 million. This is a huge return for the buck. This is why Fortune 500 companies actually advertise through NASCAR, not because it feels good, but because it delivers results. And the fact is that no matter the size of the military, you're going to still need recruits. And the fact remains, if we look at the example of 2005, where the Army didn't meet their recruiting goals, what we had to do is increase the budget for retention. So the facts of cutting one area of recruiting means that in a couple of years we'll have to actually pay more for retention in order to keep in the same folks in the National Guard that we currently need. Furthermore, back to this one particular form of advertising, I think it's highly inappropriate for this Congress to get into the business of specifying how best the National Guard or whatever branch should spend their dollars on recruiting. The Appropriations Committee has done a yeoman's task of making sure that we scrub the Department of Defense budget from top to bottom. I think this is a very strong and good appropriations bill. It does have bipartisan support. But let's face it, when we start micromanaging advertising programs that try to recruit National Guard members, we've sort of slipped into the absurd. The National Guard, from the experience that they've had in NASCAR advertising in particular, they generated 54,000 leads. I wish my colleague had referenced that other than these other numbers that he referenced before, which I think are a good reason why the Army's not continuing with that program. They didn't design it appropriately, apparently. But the National Guard has gotten a huge bang for the buck and has actually gotten recruits because of this form of advertising. I would encourage my colleagues, if they voted no on the McCollum amendment last year, there are two different amendments that deal with this very same issue. If they voted no on those two amendments, they need to vote no again. Madam Chairman, I would say this again. If you voted no on those two amendments that are structurally the same, vote no again. I would encourage my colleagues to do that, and I yield back the balance of my time.
North Carolina yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Minnesota seek recognition?
To strike the last word on
And the
this amendment.
gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Well, we just heard from the Speaker that part of what all this money is being spent on is branding and goodwill, and that the Congress and us today should not be making any changes and micromanaging what the National Guard is doing. I would call to our colleagues' attention legislation, Public Law 106-398 in the 106th Congress. The legislative information system, which is available to all of us, directs us as to what really took place in the 106th Congress. We directed the Secretary of the Army during a period beginning on October 1st, 2000 and ending December 1st, 2005 to carry out a pilot program to test various recruiting approaches. And one of them was to be an outreach that the Army was going to do with motorsports. It doesn't work, and that's why the Army has dropped it. The National Guard has, through what Mr. Kingston had, didn't come to us directly. We were provided some sponsorship information through NASCAR of all the contacts and all the hits. Everybody who walked through the gate was counted as being part of branding. Folks, this was not supposed to be about branding. It was supposed to be about recruiting. And that's why the Army spokesman on CNN said when they announced that they were ending their 10-year, multi-dollar taxpayer-funded relationship with NASCAR, quote, it was not a great investment. The Navy pulled out. The Marine Corps pulled out of NASCAR years ago. But yet the Pentagon has paid one racing team, Mr. Earnhardt's team, $136 million in taxpayers' funds for the National Guard logo on his car in the name of recruitment. This year, they're paying Mr. Earnhardt again $26.5 million, to which the National Guard has reported, this is what the Guard told me, 20 qualified candidates expressing interest, zero actual recruits. So over the past 2 years, the National Guard has spent more than $20 million in taxpayers' funds on professional bass fishing tournaments. Folks, we're in a fiscal crisis here. Bass fishing is not a national security. This Congress is cutting services to communities and needy families because we're in a fiscal crisis. Yet the Pentagon is spending in excess of $80 million on NASCAR racing sponsorships, professional bass fishing, ultimate cage fighting, and other sports sponsorships. The program is a waste of taxpayers' money. It doesn't work. Over the past few days, the professional sports lobby has come out in full force to protect their taxpayer-funded subsidy. For the purposes of the 2013 Defense Appropriation Bill, those pro teams are military contractors who have failed to deliver on their contract for the past for the taxpayers for recruits. I want to thank Representative Kingston for his leadership on this and joining me to cut a pennant bond program that's just not effective. This committee in which we're having this bill discussed right now has been bipartisan in the way the bill's been put together and bipartisan in the way this amendment's been offered. If the private sector wants to pool their money to sponsor military race car teams to demonstrate their patriotism, I say fantastic and go for it. But it is my job to be a steward of taxpayers' funds. I want to be clear about something else this amendment does not do. This amendment in no way, shape, or form prohibits or limits military recruiters from recruiting at NASCAR races or any other sports event. I just want the military recruiters to attend those races and community events where there's potential recruits. We need, as Mr. Kingston pointed out, more recruiters doing their job in the right way, and they have ideas, folks, on how we can do this better. We need to listen to the recruiters. So I think it will be just irresponsible and outrageous that Congress would go ahead and continue to borrow money from China to pay for one race car driver's team $26 million for delivering zero recruits. Our nation is facing a fiscal crisis. Communities and families and seniors and vulnerable children are bearing the brunt of deep and painful budget cuts. Congress needs to get its priorities in order and stop protecting military spending that doesn't work. I urge my colleagues to support Mr. Kingston's amendment. It's an honor to be a partner to it. We need to cut the wasteful spending in programs and reduce this deficit. Thank you.
Lady's time's expired. Any other member wish to speak to this amendment? The gentlelady from North Carolina.
Yes, excuse me. I would like to strike the last word.
And the gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, like my colleague, Mr. McHenry, I also am rising because I do oppose this amendment and saying that the Department of Defense has to limit what they do and decide how they can recruit. And mainly it's micromanaging. The biggest issue here is this approach is not going to save a dime in the long run, because when recruitment goals aren't met, and that is the challenge, the military pays out nearly $1 billion a year in extra recruitment bonuses to maintain needed recruitment numbers. And we're talking, of course, about the National Guard, who did have a 4-to-1 return on investment in motorsports. But we've got to be aware that we've got to recruit men and women where they are. We need the best men and women that we can in our military service. And, of course, we owe all of those who are currently serving a great debt of gratitude. But I don't believe that we need to tell them how they know best how to do their recruiting. I'm also a conservative, and I believe strongly in rooting out government waste. But that's not what this amendment does, because in the long run, we end up spending more money on recruitment. As my colleague said before, the House has twice voted down this amendment. It's the same vote, and I urge them to do so again. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Any other member wish to speak to this amendment? The gentleman from Mississippi, for what reason does he seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Then the gentleman from Mississippi recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I rise in opposition of this amendment. This past weekend, I had the great honor and privilege to send over 150 young men and women off to Fort Bliss to prepare their final training to go overseas. There's the 857th Engineering Company. Their mission is the horizontal construction, which is pretty much they're going to be clearing roads, and as we know, that's one of the most dangerous missions in Afghanistan. Now, I was too busy shaking hands and talking to families and others to notice what I would probably have seen in the parking lot, and that would have been a lot of bumper stickers. And on those bumper stickers, it wouldn't be faces or political advertisement. Of course, I wish there would be some. But it was more numbers, number 3, number 11, number 24, number 14, and most likely there had been a few number 88s out there, which is the car Dale Earnhardt drives for NASCAR. So with that, right now is absolutely no reason this Congress should be telling the Department of Defense how and where to spend money on recruitment. Sports sponsorships have continually been a major source of recruitment and provided a great deal of return on investment. The only other option is to spend more on recruitment and retention bonuses. As my colleague just mentioned, when they fall below a certain number, they spend billions of dollars, and we're not talking about billions of dollars. So this actually saves taxpayers money so we can continue to find the young men and women to serve in our nation's military. And as it currently stands, the National Guard cannot advertise on television, which significantly limits their opportunities to reach the audience that they want to reach. This is an effective program that remains a key tool for our National Guard and other branches of our military services. This bill has already taken serious cuts from advertising and marketing budgets for the Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, and National Guard accounts have all been cut significantly already before this amendment. There's no reason why we should continue to tie their hands by cutting more funds from the budget. These sponsorships provide the ability to market and create branding opportunities and familiarity with the service branches in areas where market research shows that the target audience spends its time. For example, data shows that NASCAR fans are very large, up to 70 million. I think that's a low number. Very patriotic, very pro-military fan base, and are extremely loyal to sponsors of teams and drivers. This is exactly who we want joining our U.S. military. Madam Chair, we are currently dealing with very serious cuts to our military because of sequestration. This is not the time or the place to be cutting the tools that our military is using to recruit the very best patriotic young people who want to serve our nation in its military. The military is maximizing their resources to fulfill their mission at home and abroad. If this wasn't successful, they wouldn't be doing it. I ask that my colleagues oppose the amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Any other member wish to speak to this amendment? The gentleman from Georgia.
I move to strike the last word.
And the gentleman from Georgia recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to voice my opposition to the amendment sponsored by Mr. Kingston and Ms. McCollum aimed at banning pro-sport sponsorship by the Department of Defense. Truly, we are in an era where the people's government should take proactive efforts to trim excesses from the budget wherever possible. This measure, Madam Speaker, does not attack an excess of government. If accepted, the U.S. government would be cutting out a proven, successful investment in our nation's military personnel. The Army, the National Guard Association strongly oppose this amendment. Last year, over 280 members of a bipartisan vote opposed this amendment. Appropriations Committee Chairman Rogers, Defense Subcommittee Chairman Young have been both opposed to this measure in committee votes and floor votes. Chairman Young has repeatedly said in 2012 that he opposes it. Our military deserves access to the most qualified potential recruits available. A vote in favor of this amendment would handicap our military's recruiting efforts. Starting in 1999, marketing the military through sports opened the door for the DoD's efforts to brand and to showcase their services to a specific target audience. The National Guard cannot advertise on broadcast television, so professional sports sponsorships becomes an efficient, effective means of reaching target markets for recruiting and retention of citizen soldiers and airmen. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are athletes. It only makes sense to advertise and market to professional sports venues. Athletes share common values with the military, such as honor, integrity, individual responsibility, teamwork, and self-sacrifice. Additionally, athletes are a key demographic in the men and women we want to serve. With the DoD's strict requirements for a recruit to qualify, only 1 in every 4 young people is even eligible to join. The DoD's success rate in recruiting stems from their direct access to potential recruits and influencers of men and women like-minded about their interest in joining the military, often found at sporting events. Pro-sport sponsorships increase the DoD's visibility, generate recruitment opportunities at events, and provide a national platform to promote each branch's image. In addition to recruitment and a recognizable national profile, military sponsorships in motorsports spotlight a good return on investment dollar for dollar. In 2011 alone, Army National Guard spent $44 million on motorsport sponsorships, but based on market value, the total media exposure the Guard received totaled over $150 million, a 336% return on investment. If less is spent on advertising, history proves that DoD will have to increase dollars for bonuses to retain current military personnel and increase dollars for recruiting bonuses. DoD motorsports partnerships have resulted in key transfers of technology. For example, the first Humvees sent to Iraq had canvas doors. Additional armor added created challenges to the Humvee suspension systems. The Marines turned to NASCAR engineers to help solve the problem. The additional project developed by the Marines is the Man Roller. Pushed in front of trucks, the roller can detonate explosive devices while protecting the Marines in the vehicle. One of the first rollers in Iraq took a blast and saved the 3 Marines inside. The Man Roller uses new suspension technology developed by the Joe Gibbs NASCAR racing team. Base commanders say that cooperation between base workers and businesses across the country is saving troops' lives. Beyond the direct investment, DoD pro-sponsorships positively influence the communities surrounding our nation's personnel. For example, the National Guard works together with their partners in Panther Racing and IndyCar to address unemployment affecting service members and their families by sponsoring hiring fairs, outreach efforts, and employee education. This amendment would likely limit the military from participating in the Olympics, flyover the games, sponsoring marathons such as the Marine Corps Marathon, as well as the Blue Angels, the Thunderbirds, and the Golden Knights. Cutting all funding towards DoD pro-sport sponsorships hinders military recruitment of qualified candidates, impairs employment resources for our nation's military families, and severely damages a positive financial investment in our military. To directly quote the DoD, quote, "To ensure the nation feels a military fully capable of performing any assigned mission, we must recruit highly qualified men and women from across America. This amendment will directly impact the recruiting quality and overall mission requirements, increasing costs and forcing reductions in the standards for accessions. A vote for this amendment is a vote against the effectiveness of our military. Please join me in opposing this amendment."
Gentleman yields back. Any other member wish to speak to the amendment? Gentleman from North Carolina, for what purpose does he seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to strike the last word.
And the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition to this amendment, and I'm not going to repeat what my colleague from Georgia just said. He covered the facts well. I think it's important here that we recognize that relationships matter. And the relationship that we have seen with the military, and especially NASCAR, that seems to be getting the brunt of the attention here, is a long-time relationship, an important relationship. You know, NASCAR grew up in North Carolina. Its home is in my district in central North Carolina. While NASCAR has spread out throughout the nation, which we're excited about, still the roots are here at home and in kind of rural America. I don't think it's any coincidence that when we look at that our military forces, about 41% of our military is from what we describe as rural America, which is only 17% of our population. And that relationship between the military and rural America is very important. The relationship between NASCAR and rural America and all America is very important. We don't need to interfere with that relationship. I don't think it's any surprise that the most popular driver in NASCAR drives the National Guard car. Number 88, Dale Earnhardt Jr. This brings kind of the relationship and the viewing that can not be done in many other ways. And so we don't need to strike that relationship. We need to build upon that because when you start looking at the ramifications, as my colleague talked about earlier, at other ways that this money can be used to help build this relationship. We look at NASCAR, the special forces, working with NASCAR to develop equipment for our military. I'm co-chair of Invisible Wounds. The idea of how we can absorb the energy to help our soldiers that are in combat situations, NASCAR works on this. The tickets that are given to our military families, to the military themselves, this is all part of that relationship. It works. We need for it to work. I oppose this amendment and ask my colleagues to also oppose it. I yield back.
Any other member wish to? The gentleman from Florida, for what purpose does he seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
And the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. You know, we were at home watching NASCAR on television a couple years ago, and my wife said, "What are the armed services doing sponsoring NASCAR cars? Don't they have a better use to spend their money than to spend those big bucks on NASCAR?" And I said, "Well, Katie, I can understand why you would think that. But, you know, we have a volunteer military, and they have to advertise for recruits somewhere. Where would you think the money would be better spent? You think they should advertise it to Philharmonic? Or maybe you think they should advertise it to ballet? We could surely get some burly, mean paratroopers if we advertise it to ballet. I think that NASCAR is a very appropriate place to advertise for recruits, just like boxing rings might be, the cage fights might be." And so I made some inquiries about it to our armed services, and they said, "You're exactly right on point." As our good friend Mr. McHenry from North Carolina shared with you a little while ago, the statistics are overwhelmingly in favor of expenditures where you get the greatest return. And the NASCAR sponsorship seems to have the greatest return, which results in the greatest savings for our taxpayers back home. Now, I wish we were spending this time right now, rather than trying to micromanage how our military most efficiently advertises for recruits, discussing the $14 billion our government overpaid to people who were not entitled to unemployment compensation, but got it anyway. I wish right now we were discussing the $4 billion in refunds in the form of tax credits our government has given to bogus dependents of people who are here illegally. I wish we were talking about the millions of dollars we've wasted in the GAO. I wish we were talking about the millions of dollars we've wasted in crony capitalism, investments in Solandro and the like in so-called green energy enterprises. But no, we're not. We're sitting here today, some people are trying to micromanage how our military gets recruits for its all-volunteer army, and they're telling the people who are best at managing our military how to do their job. You know, it's an old adage, it's an old cliche. It seems like everybody knows how to make a baby stop crying except the person holding it. And I think in this case that applies. And I think we should yield to the best judgment of our armed services and how they feel they need to recruit. I have seen Democratic presidential candidates advertise on NASCAR. I saw Democratic gubernatorial candidates advertise on race cars. As far as Okeechobee Speedway, I was at Okeechobee Speedway once and ran into somebody from the other side of the aisle who I never expected to see at a racetrack. And I said, "What are you doing here?" They said, "Well, when person blank who was running for governor decided we needed to focus on Middle America, she decided she wanted to sponsor a race car at Okeechobee Speedway." I didn't even know before that there was an Okeechobee Speedway. And they said, "You know what? It was the best investment of campaign money we ever spent." Now, these are from the other side of the aisle. I'm sure I could talk a lot about my friends on this side of the aisle, how they've made good and wise investments too. But in this case, again, I'd like for you to rely upon and reflect upon the comments made by Mr. McHenry, who talked about the very pure and simple results and accountability that's been achieved by letting the military, the people who we trust the most with protecting our country and our freedoms, do the job that they were entitled to do. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Any other member on the gentleman from Florida? For what reason does he seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I rise to strike the last word.
And the gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Much of the debate that I would make on this amendment would be very similar to the one I made earlier when the issue was the military bans. So I won't repeat those again, but I would mention the fact that this amendment has been defeated several times last year on the defense appropriations bills by this same House. We have an interesting situation here, though, today. This amendment is very similar to language later on in the bill that is subject to a point of order. Now, that has been skillfully rewritten so that this one is not subject to a point of order, but it's basically the same issue. Now, understand, the United States of America does not have the largest military in the world. We do have by far the best, but not the largest. And our military is all volunteer. The members of the military serve because they want to. But as the all-volunteer force rotates and changes, members are leaving. They retire, their time is up, they get out, they have to constantly be replaced. There has to be a constant flow of recruits coming in as the older members leave. The military has been running recruiting programs for years and years and years, and very, very successfully. They know a little bit about what it takes to encourage recruiting. The amendment itself does more than just strike out the sports, NASCAR, all these issues. It actually cuts more, $30 million more than is spent on these issues. Now, I don't know why they want to take that extra $30 million, but anyway, I just think that we should not pass this amendment. It is, like I said, very similar to one that is already in the bill that is subject to a point of order. I say let the military run the recruiting as they have done successfully for all of these years to maintain an all-volunteer force. A powerful message of the young Americans or the older Americans who want to serve, men and women, want to serve their country in the military. And these recruiting programs get their attention, direct them to where they need to be directed. So I think that this is just not a good idea to pass this amendment.
Any other member wish to speak to the amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, the noes have it. The
Madam
amendment
Chair.
is not agreed to. The gentlelady from Minnesota.
Madam Chair, we would like a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested and pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? And the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. After more than a decade of war, it's time to accelerate our drawdown from troops in Afghanistan and bring this war to a close. We've sent our brave servicemen and women to Afghanistan to eliminate the international terrorists who would do us harm. They have successfully executed this mission with phenomenal dedication and capacity. They've driven al-Qaeda from Afghanistan, destroyed their training facilities, killed or captured most of their top leaders. Under President Obama's decisive leadership and thanks to the courage and competency of our special forces, the 9/11 mastermind Osama bin Laden has met his just end. The President has outlined a plan for winding down this war, and I support drawing down our military presence in Afghanistan even more quickly than the President has suggested. We should welcome our troops back as heroes and ensure that they receive the support and care that is due when they return. Our military service members and their families have borne and continue to bear far more than their share of the burden of this war. I'm a member of the House Armed Services Committee, and I represent the 10th District of California, home to Travis Air Force Base, the largest air mobility command unit in the Air Force. And nearby in Marysville, California, is Beale Air Force Base, which is the leader in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Together, 16,000 service members across the active duty, National Guard, and Reserve, and over 75,000 veterans live in my district and in the surrounding area. These are the people who are disproportionately bearing the cost of this war. As their representative, I owe it to them to make sure that we do not ask of them any more than is absolutely necessary to ensure America's national security. But the majority here in this House is determined to prevent even a serious debate about ending the war in Afghanistan. They have inserted language into the National Defense Authorization Act that would actually slow down the withdrawal of U.S. forces and keep nearly 70,000 troops in Afghanistan until at least 2015. When the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee tried to offer an amendment to replace this provision, the majority said it was out of order. When a bipartisan group of members of Congress joined together on an amendment replacing this provision, the majority blocked that amendment. This is the longest war in America's history, claiming thousands of lives, costing hundreds of billions of dollars, and the majority simply doesn't want to talk about it. We must talk about this war. We must take time to think deeply about the sacrifice of those who have served. To date, 1,875 of our military service members have been killed in Afghanistan, leaving thousands more to endure the unimaginable grief of loss of a loved one. 15,322 of our troops have been wounded seriously, suffering life-altering injuries. Not including in that number are those with psychological wounds, invisible but no less devastating. We have spent $500 billion in taxpayer dollars on the war in Afghanistan, and this legislation would allocate $88 billion more to be spent in this year alone. There are some who would continue this war indefinitely. They opposed a fixed timeline for ending combat operations and bringing our troops home. They oppose any concrete plans for transitioning full responsibility to Afghanistan for security as quickly as possible. Even worse, they would have American troops continuing to fight against a domestic insurgency in Afghanistan, and they think it's America's job to defeat those armed factions that threaten the Karzai government, perhaps the most corrupt government in this world. In fact, they've inserted language into this bill that says the U.S. objective in Afghanistan is to defend the Karzai government against the Taliban. And now they also have an interest in American troops defeating the Haqqani network and any other faction that's taking on the Karzai government. involving us in a multi-sided civil war. It was never the American mission in Afghanistan, nor should it be. As President Obama clearly said last week, and I quote, "Our goal is to destroy al-Qaeda." We began the military operations in Afghanistan with a very clear reason. It's time for us to end this war and bring our troops home. I thank you, Madam Chair.
The clerk will read.
Page 8, line 3, Operation and Maintenance, Navy, $41,463,773,000.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Chair, to strike the last word.
And the gentleman from California recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I rise to strike the last word, and I want to have a colloquy between myself, the chairman, and the gentleman from Washington on an issue regarding costs associated with the security clearance process.
Mr. Chairman, will the gentleman yield?
I'll yield.
I would be happy to discuss the cost of the security clearance process.
Thank you. As the gentleman knows, security clearances are necessary to protect our national security and are required for thousands of jobs. This process is also expensive. DoD pays billions of dollars to the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, to manage the DoD security clearance program. OPM has made some improvements in their investigation process, so the program is no longer on GAO's high-risk list. But the problem remains that OPM relies on manual labor to process DoD security clearances. The research scientists at Personnel Security Research Center, known as PERSERAC, which is under the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, has developed a suite of automated tools. These tools could save millions of dollars without sacrificing quality if these tools were incorporated into the security reinvestigation process. I greatly appreciate that the chairman and ranking member of the Defense Subcommittee have included report language encouraging DoD to investigate more into automated tools for security clearance process. Would my colleagues agree that DoD needs to leverage the resources of PERSERAC to integrate their research, called ACES, into DoD security investigation process?
Will the gentleman yield?
Certainly I'll yield to the gentleman from Washington.
To my good friend from California, with the tight budget constraints the DoD is facing, I appreciate him bringing to our attention that the department can save millions of dollars by requiring DoD security investigation to use the ACES tool. You're up.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the distinguished gentleman, I thank the distinguished gentleman for his response, and I'd hope to attach to the bill language directing DoD to conduct a review. But in the interest of the House rules and jurisdictional matters, I chose not to.
Would the gentleman from California yield?
Certainly I'll yield to the distinguished chairman.
I will say I'm aware of the gentleman's deep interest and appreciate his flexibility in finding ways to address this issue. And like my good friend from Washington, Mr. Dix, I agree that we should work with our good friend, Mr. Farr, to ensure that DoD is leveraging the security clearance research of the Personnel Security Research Center to improve the DoD security reinvestigation process. And I thank the gentleman for bringing this to our attention.
I'd like to thank the distinguished chairman and the ranking member, my distinguished friend, Mr. Dix, in their leadership, their friendship, and their cooperation in making things work more efficiently and more cost-effectively. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman may not reserve. Does the gentleman yield back?
Yes.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. And the clerk will read.
Page 8, line 12, Operation and Maintenance, Marine Corps, $6,075,667,000. Operation and Maintenance, Air Force, $35,408,795,000.
The gentleman from California seek recognition.
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate.
Amendment offered by Mr. Gallegly of California, page 8, line 24, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $24 million. Page 13, line 9, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $8 million. Page 27, line 7, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $16 million.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairwoman, my amendment will provide funding to the Air National Guard so it can obtain much-needed firefighting equipment so they can more effectively combat the devastating wildfires that destroy millions of acres of land and homes every year in the western United States. The likelihood of calling upon MAPS-equipped Air National Guard and Air Force Reserve C-130s has increased significantly. MAPS are modular air firefighting systems that drop retardant to create fire breaks. In 2003, the U.S. Forest Service had 44 fixed-wing aerial firefighting aircraft. By 2004, the number had dwindled to 19, and as of June the 3rd of this year, that number stands at only 8. An additional aircraft on interim contract with the Forest Service and air tankers borrowed from Canada and Alaska are being utilized to try to fill the shortfall. While the Forest Service firefighting fleet has gotten significantly smaller, the number of wildfires have been increasing. In fact, in 2011, 74,000 fires burned 8.7 million acres. The most recent 10-year average indicates that the fires burned an average of 7.4 million acres per year. As the fleet diminishes, stress on remaining aircraft increases. Further, the distance between fires and available aircraft have been increasing. The result is more fires burning out of control. Additionally, an increase of flight time and cycles contributes to an earlier demise of the remaining aircraft. Only 8 C-130s equipped with MAPS units are available to supplement the Forest Service fleet. Even when all 8 are called upon, the number of heavy air tanker aircraft is less than half that existed in 2003. We clearly need more aircraft, and the Forest Service is not likely to produce aircraft capable of meeting the need for the next 2 or 3 years, or probably longer. My amendment will provide an interim solution to this problem by providing $8 million in Air National Guard so they can make 2 existing Guard wings capable of operating and flying 2 legacy MAPS 1 units each. That will give us 4 additional tanker aircraft to fight wildfires that have been ravaging the western United States. My amendment would also appropriate $16 million for the Air Force to procure 2 new aerial dispersal units for the use for the Air National Guard. Activating the legacy MAPS units will help get more planes fighting fires this next year, while these new aerial disbursement units are being produced and hopefully available for use within 2 years. Our nation desperately needs our aircraft to fight wildfires, and the Air Guard is ready to go to work. The U.S. needs more aircraft available to fight the wildfires that have ravaged Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah this season alone. And I urge the support of my colleagues, and Madam Chairwoman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes? The gentleman from Washington seek recognition.
I rise in support of the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
This amendment seeks to add more funding to purchase equipment vital to the disaster mission of the Air National Guard. Recently, forest fires have been devastating Colorado, and the Air National Guard has been fighting alongside the Forest Service. The Modular Airborne Firefighting System, or MAFS, provides emergency capability to supplement existing commercial tanker support on wildland fires. This system aids the Forest Service when all other air tankers are activated but further assistance is needed. The Forest Service can request help from the Air Force's MAFS unit, who can be ready in a few hours' notice with this modular system. When the Air National Guard adds the Modular Airborne Firefighting System to their C-130 aircraft, they are adding another capability to their aircraft. Creating a dual-mission aircraft without major modifications to an existing piece of equipment is efficient and cost-effective. And quite frankly, we need to get new C-130Js for the Guard And I hope that we can do that. That's been a problem we've had with OMB over the scoring on this, whether you could lease them or buy them. But this is an interim step, which is a good one, and I think we should accept the gentleman's amendment.
Any other member wish to speak to the gentleman's amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I have an amendment I think the clerk has to read first.
Will read.
Page 9, line 1, Operation and Maintenance Defense-wide, including transfer of funds, $31,780,813,000.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition? And the clerk will designate the
Amendment number
Oregon.
8, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Blumenauer of Oregon.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We take great pride in the American military trained fighting force. We work hard to make sure they are properly equipped. But decades of military training has left dangerous explosives and harmful chemicals on millions of acres of United States land. This contaminated real estate now serves as housing, schools, parks, and playgrounds in every congressional district in the country. In fact, you may have read in the morning paper down at what is called the Yards near National Stadium, the development that is being worked there, they uncovered a 1,000-pound bomb less than 1 kilometer from where we're debating today. To help the Department of Defense become a better partner for our communities and our constituents, I strongly urge that my colleagues support an amendment that would preserve the Department of Defense efforts to employ skilled labor and high-tech companies to clean up these dangerous liabilities and create economic development opportunities on these dangerous properties. Congress established the Defense Environment Restoration Fund, formerly used Defense Site Program, the DERP-FUDS, in 1986 to remove hazardous material from former Department of Defense properties and allow for safe reuse. Over 2 decades later, 2,600 properties nationwide require cleanup at an estimated cost of over $18 billion. And I will tell you, my colleagues, after having worked in this area for over a dozen years, that probably understates it. The current funding for the program is less than $300 million, 0.5% of base defense spending. At this rate, the Department estimates at this lowball figure of $18 billion, we will not finish cleaning up the sites we know about for the next 250 years. My amendment would simply restore funding to the current level to ensure that we can continue work removing these dangerous burdens from our communities within our lifetimes, to say nothing of our great-grandchildren. At the time when total military spending amounts to more in 1 day with what we spend in an entire year, I strongly urge my colleagues to reprioritize our investments. These sites are decades, in some cases they are hundreds of years old. Now, the Defense Department has an obligation to clean up after itself, and they've made great progress. They've made critical technological breakthroughs in removing unexploded ordnance, making it less expensive, and some of the investments that we have made have actually saved lives overseas, because the same technology that will help us figure out whether it's a hubcap or a 105mm shell can make a difference in IEDs overseas in Afghanistan or Iran. I strongly urge my colleagues to support this amendment. It has operational impacts today for our military. It has economic development impact, which will help us return millions of acres to productive use, and it's the right thing to do. I don't want to be in a situation where we shortchange what the Department of Defense does. Remember, in prior debates, Mr. Dix, Mr. Young may remember, I brought to the floor Larry the Lizard coloring books that we were distributing to school children to warn them of the hazards because we hadn't invested enough to clean up. Or the children that were killed in a former defense operation in San Diego because they found a bomb when they were playing. I strongly urge that you approve this amendment and simply return the funding to the level that we have today. It will make a difference for the military now and for generations to come. I appreciate your consideration and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Any other member on the gentleman's amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
And the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm not opposed to the gentleman, his effort, what he wants to do. But a lot of these sites, there's no disposition. We don't know what's going to happen to them. Will they stay as owned by the federal government? Will they go to communities? We don't know the answer to that. We don't know the disposition. But they do need cleaned up, and there's no doubt about that. But here's my problem with this amendment. He takes the funds from the Defense-wide Readiness Fund, the Operations and Maintenance Fund, which provides for our readiness, provides for training. It provides for our special forces. It provides for the support, safety, and quality of life programs for our troops and their families, including programs to assist spouses of service members with employment and job training, which is a key initiative of the First Lady. As much as I agree that this needs to be done, we do not want to take it out of the Defense Operation and Maintenance, which is our Defense-wide Operation and Maintenance Fund. So I've got to oppose the amendment while I would like to help him in some other way to accomplish this, but not from this fund that is so important. Readiness is readiness is readiness. And our troops have to be trained, they have to be equipped, they have to be ready, and I oppose the amendment. Yes, sir.
I appreciate your understanding of the importance and your concern about prioritization. If we don't prolong it and debate and recorded vote and all of this sort of thing, would it be possible to work with you and the ranking member as we move forward to see if there is an opportunity for us to plus up this fund a little further in other areas?
I thank the gentleman for the question, and I say absolutely yes. I would very much like to do this because I believe we need to do what it is you want to do. But I just can't support taking it from an account that provides for our readiness of our troops.
I would also support the gentleman in efforts to try to find another less objectionable source for the funding.
Unfortunately, I have to make the same argument.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Any other member wish to speak to the gentleman's amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
And the clerk will read. Will the gentleman specify his amendment?
It's amendment number 89.
Amendment number 89. Clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Kucinich of Ohio. Page 9, line 6, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $10 million. Page 35, line 15, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $10 million. Page 35, line 23, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $10 million.
Gentleman from Ohio, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, I, along with my colleague Bob Filner, are offering an amendment to restore an overall loss of $10 million in research funding dedicated to finding a cure for Gulf War illness, an illness that directly affects over 1/4 of veterans from the first Gulf War. This amendment has the support of the veterans of foreign wars, it has the support of the Vietnam Veterans of America, and the support of the National Vietnam and Gulf War Veterans Coalition. According to the Congressional Budget Office, it will reduce total outlays by $7 million. Veterans of the first Gulf War suffer from persistent symptoms, including chronic headache, widespread pain, cognitive difficulties, debilitating fatigue, gastrointestinal problems, respiratory symptoms, and other abnormalities that are not explained by traditional medicine or psychiatric diagnoses. Research shows that as these brave veterans age, they're at double the risk for ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease as their non-deployed peers. There may also be connections to multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease. Sadly, there's no known treatments for the lifelong pain these veterans endure. Gulf War illness research was slated to receive a total of $25 million in fiscal year 12, $15 million at the VA, and $10 million at the DoD's Gulf War Illness Research Program. We've learned that the VA cut $10 million from its FY13 program, which more or less supports allegations that VA officials whose views on Gulf War illness have been discredited by the Institute of Medicine and the scientific community, that they're obstructing new research. The veterans of the first Gulf War who remain without a cure should not have to pay the price for this controversy. That's why this amendment would restore $10 million into a research program that has proven itself, the Defense Department's Gulf War Illness Research Program. Last year, researchers funded by this program completed the first successful pilot study of a medication to treat one of the major symptoms of Gulf War illness. The critical increase in funding from this amendment was built on progress that's already been made, including a follow-up clinical trial, as well as other promising studies which have been waiting for funding. The offset for this amendment comes from the $32 billion Operations and Maintenance defense-wide account in Title II. Congress has a responsibility to these Gulf War veterans, has a responsibility to ensure that these individuals who put it all on the line and who are paying with a lifetime of pain and a potentially shortened life, it's our responsibility to make sure they're not left behind. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment to fully fund research into Gulf War veterans' illness. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Who rises in opposition? Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I'm happy that I'm finally getting an opportunity to be supportive of an amendment offered by my friend Mr. Kucinich, because so often I have to oppose his amendments. This bill already includes $10 million for the program. He's concerned that the Veterans Affairs and Military Construction Subcommittee did not include an additional $5 million. And I understand that, and that's okay. But you know, medical research on Gulf War illness or whatever it is important. What we learned from this program could help us in other programs of diseases coming from Iraq and Afghanistan. We are seeing, if you get a chance to visit at Walter Reed Bethesda Hospital, seeing some very strange bacteria and viruses and molds and funguses that are coming from places that we never expected to see, but we're seeing them now. So this research program could help another research program and to deal with these deadly diseases that are affecting our troops in large numbers. And so while we've already done $10 million in this bill, I'm going to agree with Mr. Kucinich and agree to his amendment to add the additional money. I do.
I agree with the Chairman. this Gulf War illness has been something that bothered me a great deal. There was a very difficult diagnosis on what was causing this, but I think an additional investment here is worthy, and I think we should accept the amendment. I'm glad the chairman accepts it.
Comments, and thank Mr. Kucinich for offering the amendment, and I yield back my time.
Back this time, the questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment's adopted.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from Ohio.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will
Number 91.
designate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr.